If you want to master subtitle animation, the easiest way is to improve your understanding of detail. And it's not just what you know, it's how you build it and how it saves you time. Your timing, your visuals, your creativity, and your node flow. It all comes together to play this massive role in communicating high quality. Now, I've studied several of the top brands in social media, and the truth is, even though they all have their own styles, they all use the exact same principles to deliver with both high quality and high consistency. So in this video, I'm going to break down 5 methods behind the most popular niches and how you can use them to level up your subtitles. And if you do this, you'll be able to make subtitles faster at a higher quality with the reusability that will save you hours of time. By the way, if you don't know me, my name's Isaiah, and I make custom solutions for creators just like you. The first method we're going to be looking at is the Mr. Beast method of subtitle animation. Here we are in the edit page of DaVinci Resolve. Now in our effects library, which you can access up here, we're going to make sure we have effects selected. Then we're going to go to Fusion Composition and drag a Fusion Composition onto our timeline. Then we're going to go to the bottom of our screen and click this little magic wand icon right here to go to the Fusion page. Now, in order to add some text into our composition so that we can actually begin to create our Mr. Beast text, I'm going to hit Shift Spacebar on my keyboard, and I'm just going to type in the word text, go to where it says Text Plus. We're going to click on that, and we're going to click Add. Now, this example we're taking from his Squid Game video where he has his iconic text, and there are really only 2 elements that make his method work. The first is the shading elements, and the second is the animation. But in order for the animation to work, there's one property we need to adjust, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. Now, I have my footage up here in our first viewer. We're going to go to click this double window box right here to open our second viewer. And if I go back to the beginning of our Fusion composition, right here, we're on frame 0. You can see we have his text right here. It says the longest, and we have our text in our right viewer. And you can see these look almost identical to each other. Now, for those of you who are wondering, the font we're using to emulate his style is Kamika Axis. I'm going to have the download link in the description below so that you can follow along. Now, with the text selected, we're going to go up into the shading tab of our inspector, which is right here. And you can see we have 8 different shading elements. Now, what a shading element is just a different accent to help your text stand out a little bit more. The first shading element will always be the body. And if I uncheck the body, you can see that the main part of our text completely disappears. If we turn it back on, it reappears. Now, there are a whole bunch of shading elements like drop shadows and full-on boxes that you can have as backgrounds around your text. The only shading elements we're going to be using for this method are our text body, which is shading element 1, and our outline, which is shading element 2. Now, if you don't have shading element 2 already checked off, you're going to want to go to it and click the enable checkbox. You're going to notice that it probably is appearing something like this. And that is because the default thickness on an outline always starts at 0.02. Now, what we did is we brought this up to 0.0693. You don't need to have yours exact, just kind of get it close. And we also went down to the color area of our outline, and we just took our red and dragged it all the way down to black. Now, for the majority of text styles, this is all you're going to have to do. But something we notice with Mr. Beasts is we actually have a little bit of an offset with our outline. You'll notice that the left side of our text outline and the top is a little bit thinner than the right side and the bottom. And we were actually able to achieve that exact same look by adjusting the position of our text outline. Now, we've already enabled our text outline, we've changed our thickness, and we've also brought the color down from red to black. And if we go even further down, we can see we have this positioning tab. And the positioning tab does exactly what you would think it does, which is it allows us to adjust where our outline is going to appear. And to give you an idea of how the default shading positions normally look, if I double click on the word offset here, I can reset it back to normal, and you'll see that this is what our shading normally looks like, which isn't bad. But adding that slight offset takes our text from looking very flat and plain to giving it a little bit of depth and pop. And this is one of the details that so many people overlook when they're adding in different shading elements for their text. So now that we have the style of our text created, we're going to want to animate it with the same kind of motion that we have in the Mr. Beast video. And the way we're going to do this is very, very specific. Now, something else I want to draw your attention to is the other tabs that we have on our text node. Right now, we're in the shading tab, which is where we did all of our shading work. We have our main text tab, which is where we can set up a lot of the main properties of our text. But we also have these two other tabs in between, layout and transform. And usually when you're going to animate text, you'll animate it using either your layout controls, which just for example, you can see we can move our text around and we can change the size. And in the transform, we can do the exact same thing. Now, instead of using these two tabs, we're going to use a transform node. And what a transform node does is it allows you to take any kind of information, like the information in a text node, and then animate it using the same controls that we have in our layout tab and our transform tab. And the reason we're doing this in a transform node as opposed to in a text node is so that when we're done doing this, you're going to have an isolated animation that you can then take and use with anything else you'd like. So the way we add a transform node in is the same way we add in a text plus node, which is by hitting Shift Spacebar on our keyboard and typing in transform. We're going to go to this one specifically. We're not doing this transform box or the transform 3D. You're going to be looking for the transform XF. So once we have our transform node in our Fusion composition, I'm going to frame 0 because that is exactly where we have our Mr. Beast text animating, where we have it kind of pop up here and then shrink back down. And if we use the arrow keys on our keyboard, we can go frame by frame and we can see that only the size aspect of our text is changing. It's not moving around, it's not shaking, it's not moving on any kind of angles. We're only going to be animating the size. And the way we're going to animate our size for this is by using something called keyframes. Now, the keyframes are all these little kind of diamond-shaped tools that you see on the side of each property here. And keyframes allow you to change the value of a property over time. So you could have something start at 0, and by the time your media reaches 10 seconds, it can have moved from 0 all the way to 1. So if I take a fresh transform node and I just plug this into our viewer here, I can go to frame 0, and you can just kind of drag along your timeline just by clicking and dragging here. I'm going to frame 0. Then I'm going to go over into my inspector on the right here. I'm going to add in a keyframe. And because I think I'm going to want my animation to end with a size of 1, I might put this at, let's try 0.9. And then if we move forward, it looks like our text increases in size over 2 frames. So maybe we'll go to 1.1, and then we'll go over 1 more frame, and then we'll type in 1. And something you'll notice is that every single time we changed the value of our size, it automatically added a new keyframe. So we have a keyframe on frame 3, we have a keyframe on frame 2, we don't have a keyframe on frame 1 because there's still a change taking place, and then we have a keyframe on frame 0. And so now if we watch our animation back, we can see our text is popping up before shrinking back down. Now, you remember a minute ago when I told you there was a very specific detail we needed to pay attention to? Well, now's the time we're going to do it. So I'm going to bring my text down here to match up with our Mr. Beast example. And if you're paying very close attention, you'll notice that the Mr. Beast text is actually growing from the bottom, where our text is growing from the center. Now, what do I mean by that? So you can see if I click on our transform node, it will show the exact center of our text. And when we animate the size on the right here, we're growing from this point right here. And if we look at the bottom line of our Mr. Beast text, we can see that our text, when it's growing, is not moving down at all. So I can leave my cursor here and you can see the text is not moving over my cursor at all. Whereas if I put my cursor right here, we can see that our text actually does kind of move on top of our cursor. And the reason it does this is because of something called pivot points. Now, where shading elements can help you adjust the depth and perception of your text to give it a little bit more pop and help it feel a little bit more alive, Your pivot point will control the origin of where all your animations take place. Now, to give you a quick example of what I mean, I have a black circle here, and what I've done is I've taken the pivot point and I've moved it over to the right side. Now, you'll notice when I bring the size down, instead of shrinking into the center of the circle, it shrinks towards the pivot point. And if we adjust our angle, our circle will rotate around the pivot point. So with our Mr. Beast text, because we have the pivot point in the center here instead of at the bottom, we're always going to be growing from the center instead of growing from the bottom. And this is something we can very easily adjust by going into our inspector here, going down from center to pivot, and adjusting the Y property, which is the up and down property. And you'll notice our green X begin to shift, boom, just like that. And now our text is growing from the bottom instead of growing from the center. So now we've got our Mr. Beast text and we're almost done with it. We still have one last step to do, and that is to make sure that our pivot point is always bound to the bottom of our text, so that no matter where we move it, our text will always animate from the bottom. And just to give you an example of what I mean. So let's say we adjust our text to a font like this. Right? You can see our center is still right here. But now, even though we haven't changed the value on our pivot point, right? And we can even set our center back to its default value, our pivot point is still below our text, meaning that when we're shrinking down and moving up, we're going to be shrinking from much further away, which becomes a big problem if you end up having your pivot point be super, super far away like this. Because the further away your pivot point is from your text, the more drastic the changes are going to be. So this is the exact same animation, just with a pivot point that is further away. Now stick with me here, because this is actually a really easy fix. We can very easily make sure that our pivot point will always adapt to the bottom of our text, no matter what font we're using, no matter what size it is, anything. And the way we're going to do it is by using something called a data output window. I want you to imagine an invisible box around our text right here, just like how I'm dragging a box over it right now. But instead of the box being any random size, the box will only be as big as it needs in order to span the entire length and height of our text. Now, why does this matter? Well, if we can tell our transform's pivot point right here to always be at the same position as the bottom of our text, then we never have to worry about it not matching up ever again. And the way we can do this is by right-clicking on our pivot control, and we're going to go down and click expression. If you don't know what an expression is, don't worry, we're about to turn that confusion into confidence. An expression is basically just math used for animation. So if we were to take our size control, for example, we could technically type in 1 + 1, and it would give us a size output of 2, but that wouldn't be very useful. So instead, what we're going to do is use a variable, and our variable is our data output window. And so the reason this is so useful is that because as the value of the data output window changes, that value will get plugged into our pivot point and automatically update so that it is always matching the bottom line of our text. Now, what we're seeing in the current expression field right here is the default value for our pivot point. And the pivot point always needs two values. It needs an X value and a Y value. And because we don't want to mess with the X value, we can leave it alone completely. So we're going to make sure we're on the right side of this comma here, and I'm going to delete the 0.5. And just to show you guys exactly what I mean when I say we can control our pivot point, if I type in 1 instead, you can see that now our pivot value is 0.51. And so what we're going to type in here in order to get the exact value that will match up with the bottom of our text is a few things. We need to type in the node name because we need to tell the transform node where it should be looking for node information. In this case, it's going to be our text node. Then we need to tell it which data window to use, because just like the sides of a box, we have 4 different data windows. The left side is data window 1, the right side is data window 3, the bottom is data window 2, and the top is data window 4. So the order of the data windows moves counterclockwise. And because we want the bottom of our text right here, we're going to be looking for data window 2. So let's start typing this in. I'm going to go down to my text node and I'm just going to hover over it. And if we look in the bottom left corner, we can see exactly what name Fusion is using to recognize the node. In this case, it's matching up with the label that we have, which is text2_2. So I'm going to type in text2_2. Then we're going to put dot output dot data window. And you're going to want to make sure that the O in output is capitalized, as well as the D in data and the W in window. And then we're going to open some square brackets and we're going to type in the number 2 because we want to tell it which data window to use as reference. Now, if we click away, we can test to see if this is working by adjusting our center control and seeing if our pivot changes with it. And we can tell nothing is working. In fact, the node itself has turned red to tell us that, hey, we've done something wrong. And the reason it's not working is because output data windows always return information as a pixel value, not as the same 0 to 1 value that we typically work with when we're in Fusion. So the way that we can actually get it to give us this pixel value as something that Fusion can work with and understand is by taking our output data window and dividing it by the overall height of our text window. So what I'm going to do is click back into our expression between our overall closed bracket and our square closed bracket. And I'm going to add in a /, which now will allow us to divide by any variable we want. In this case, it's going to be our output height. So because we need to tell our expression which node's height to divide by, we're going to, again, type in text2_2. Then we're going to put dot output dot height. And now when we click away, we can see our pivot point has actually changed. So let's give this a test by clicking back onto our text node and changing our font. So before I think we were 0.48, now we're 0.434. Let's change our font again to something crazy like this. And now we can see, again, our pivot point has changed to 0.408. And so now we can be confident that no matter what font we use, we're always going to end up with a pixel perfect pivot point to keep our animations looking high quality and matching some of the top creators in the world. And just so you guys can see exactly how well this matches up, we can match this over top of our Mr. Beast footage. And if I go frame by frame, you can see we're matching up with this near identical. So just before we move on, because it only gets more advanced from here, so far, we've learned a little bit about shading elements, what they are, how they work, and how we can use them to add a little bit more pop and life to our subtitles. We've also learned a little bit about animation and how we can use pivot points to influence how our animations look, and we even used an expression to take the data window of our text and make sure we always get the same consistent animations every time. Congratulations, you have mastered the Mr. Beast method. All right, the next method we're going to look at is the Alex Hormozi method. And to tell you guys the truth, you actually don't need Fusion at all for this one. So back in the edit page of DaVinci Resolve, I have an example up here of how Alex Hormozi typically does his text. It's going to be usually something like this, where we're looking at a single font, but with having the words on each line or in each phrase be different colors or different sizes. I'm sure a lot of you have tried to do something like this before and have ended up with multiple layers of text. Well, today we're going to do it with just one. So up again in our effects library here, making sure we have our effects library open, we're going to go to titles. And if we go to the bottom here, you can see we have two different text labeled titles. The bottom one is Text Plus and has a ton of customization options. It is super, super useful. You're going to ignore that one completely. And you're going to go to our basic title text. We're going to click and drag that onto our timeline. And we're going to go up to the top right of our screen. And we're going to open our inspector. Now, there's a very specific reason we use the basic title over the custom one. And it's because of an extremely useful tool called character level styling. Now, what is character level styling and how does it work? I'm going to tell you in a minute, but first, let's get our text set up properly. Clicking on our basic title here in our timeline, I'm going to go up to our text box here and I'm going to type in the same text we have in our example, just so you guys have a nice side-by-side once we've finished making it. And the font we're going to be using is Rebelton. I'm going to put a link for this font down below in the description just for you. So if you want, you can follow along. So now we've got the exact same words as we do in our example, but as you can see, it is far from finished. So we're going to go into our line spacing here, and we're just going to click and drag on the number. Fun fact, you don't actually have to click and drag on the slider. You can just click and drag right on the number itself, or you can even double click and you can just type in whatever you want as a value. So I'm going to go like this. We're going to bring this down to like a -52. And I'm also going to click and drag our size down so that it kind of matches. Here we go. Let's do something like this. Bring our tracking in a little bit. Next, what we need to do is add a stroke onto our text. So we're going to slowly bring our stroke value up. And you can see as we bring the stroke value up, it's kind of taking over our text. So we're going to check off the outside only option. And that makes sure that our text body stays on top of the text outline. Next, we're going to go to our drop shadow. And if I scroll in here, it'll give us a little bit of an easier time making adjustments to our drop shadow. And as I click and drag on the Y value here, you'll see our drop shadow begin to move around. Now, something I've noticed with the drop shadow is that whenever you have it at a value of 0 and 0, it doesn't seem to show up. But as soon as you make any kind of adjustment, it'll pop up. So let's adjust it to something like this. I'll bring the blur down just a little bit. Boom, and there we go. And so now we're much closer to our desired result, but we still haven't seen the secret sauce that makes this effect so cool, and why it's really so surprising that we can do this in the edit page without needing Fusion. And I'm going to show it to you guys right now. So what is character level styling? It's the ability to change the size and color of any word or even any character within a single text box without needing multiple layers or multiple nodes. And we can do this right now just by highlighting the word any, going to our color, and I'm going to make this yellow. We can actually click pick screen color and we can get the exact color from our example. And now you can see we have the exact color without needing multiple text layers, which is what you used to have to do with a lot of older softwares, or maybe if you didn't know how to use different effects, you'd end up getting stuck using multiple layers of text and it would waste a whole bunch of your time. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. I've highlighted habit, boom, and we're looking pretty good. But as we can see, the word any is very clearly larger than the rest of it. So we're going to highlight the word any and we're just going to scale this up. Now we can even adjust the zoom and the position. Now I'm actually going to get rid of the space right here as well. And just for a little bit of extra style points, let's increase the size of our habit. And then we'll bring this down just a little bit to match up. Let's bring our stroke size up a little bit on all of them. And just like that, we've managed to recreate the Alex Hormozi subtitle style without even needing to use Fusion and doing it completely within the edit page on only one layer. But that's not even the best part. Now, as we all know, text templates can take a lot of time to build. And if you've built a text effect like this, typically you want it to be something that is easy to reuse over and over and over. And the really cool thing about this is we actually can save it right here on the edit page. And we can do it by using one of Resolve's really awesome built-in features called power bins. Now, what is a power bin? Well, if we go up to the top left of our screen right here and we click on Media Pool, I'm going to close our effects library. You'll see right here, I've just got some random folders, or as they're called in Resolve, bins. And the way a bin works is that you can put any kind of media you want into it to help keep you organized. The only downside is that if you open up a different project, your media is not going to be there. And for something like this, if we're making multiple different projects and we plan on reusing this over and over and over, the reusability of this is essential. So let's move our cursor up to the top right of our media pool and click on this 3-dot menu. Then we're going to go down and we're going to click on the option here called Show Power Bins. Now, if we go down to the bottom left of our screen, you'll notice we've gained access to an entirely new area in our media pool. Now, the difference between your normal media pool and power bins is that I can take our text right here, click it, and drag it directly into our Power Bin, then I can open up a brand new project, and you can see right in our Power Bin, we have the exact same text still available with all of our color, font, and size changes completely unchanged. And so between the versatility of our basic text effect, how it's equipped with character level styling, and how easy it is to save and reuse it using Power Bins, I think we can say with confidence that we've mastered the Alex Hormozi method. All right, the next method of subtitle animation we're looking at is motivation. Most of you probably already know exactly what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the kind of content you see that's like this, where you've got, you know, a whole bunch of different cuts for different things. It's some guy talking about how you can grow. They're talking about whatever it is they talk about to stay motivated. But obviously what we're going to focus on is the subtitles. And if you've made it this far in the video, strap in, because I'm about to share some gold with you that you can use to make some extremely powerful text presets. Now, when we take a look at this, we can see there's obviously a bunch of stuff going on here. We've got glowing text, and we've got every single line animating both in and out. It's blurring, and it will either be shrinking or growing. It might even be warping just a little bit. And to make something like this work, there's a few special pieces we're going to need to put in place that you probably haven't seen anywhere else. But before we do that, let me show you exactly how you can build and animate the base for this, and then we'll dive into the secrets of how you turn a normal text animation into an extremely powerful and even a flexible text preset. All right, so first things first, obviously we're going to need to bring in another text node with our shift and space bar. We're going to hit text plus, and we're going to drag this into our timeline. Now I'm going to hit our double bar up here to add in a second viewer, so we can have our reference footage up on the left, and we can have our text here on the right. Now, the font we ended up using that best fits our reference is Organetto Ultra Bold. Just like I did with the first two fonts, there's going to be a link to this font down below in the description. And the line we're going to use to animate is right here from everyone else. You can see right off the bat, we're doing pretty good. We've got the relative kind of shape of our text down, exactly what we're after. And now we need to create a little bit of the style that we have. Now we've got a little bit of a glow effect. We definitely, you can tell, have a bit of a drop shadow right here. And something that's important for us to realize is that not only do we have kind of this outer hazy glow, we also have a bit of a more localized glow on our text. So we're going to be working with two different glows right here. Now, normally what you're going to see most people do when they want to add a glow onto text is they're going to hit shift space bar and they're going to type in glow. Now, when we connect our text to the yellow input of our glow node, you see we get something like this. Now, if we hit shift space bar again, we can connect our glow into a soft glow, increase the glow size, bring the gain down, and you get a pretty similar effect compared to the reference. Now let's go into our text plus node here, and I'll zoom in just a little bit, and we're going to go up into our shading tab right here. We're going to go to our second shading element, enable that. We're going to bring our red down all the way. I'm going to bring our thickness up just a little bit, and then I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to add quite a bit of softness. And what this is going to do is it's going to help keep our text defined and add a little bit of separation from our background. Now, although this looks pretty good, we run into some problems when we try to add things like drop shadows, because our glows will end up, well, glowing over top of our drop shadows and any kind of other accents that we want to put on this. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete our two glows, and we're going to go up into the shading tab of our text node. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable our second shading element, and we're going to do the same thing we did with our other outlines, which is bring our red all the way down, and we're going to bring our thickness up just a little bit. Now, you can see we've got a little bit of an outline here, but we don't actually want any kind of outline on our text. What we do want is a drop shadow. So you can see we have in our inspector here, in the shading tab of our text, we have this little appearance menu right here, and this will change exactly how our second shading element will show up. Now, to show you what I mean, if we click border outline, we end up with these boxes around each letter. We can do something like this where we've got, again, a box around each letter, but this time it's filled in. We can get an actual outline around our text, or we can just get a black layer of text that right now is underneath of our text layer 1. And if I go to shading element 1 and we turn it off, you can see underneath we have our same text, just black. So we're going to re-enable this. We're going to go back into shading element 2, and I'm going to scroll down to the softness area of our text. And what I'm going to do is I'm slowly going to start bringing the X and the Y softness up. And you're going to notice something very, very subtle begin to happen. And that is we're creating a little bit of a drop shadow around our text. Now, just to show you exactly what's happening here, with our softness turned all the way down, we have a very clear image of our text. And when we pull our X softness up, we're bringing up a bit of a horizontal blur. When we bring our Y softness up, we increase the vertical blur. And this allows us to create a little bit of an outer shadow around our text. So now that we've got this, it's time for me to show you exactly what I mean when I tell you that the glow isn't going to serve you as well as your shading elements. Let's turn on our third shading element, which funnily enough actually is a drop shadow. And instead, we're going to change the appearance to our filled in block border here. We're going to switch the color to white, and we're going to increase the softness all the way up. Now, this isn't giving us quite the look that we want, so let's switch the appearance to our normal characters that we can see here. And with our softness all the way up, we can also slowly bring up the glow. Let's set this to something like a 0.5. And now we're getting something that looks a little bit closer to what we're after here. And there's something very specific I want you to notice, which is that if we look at the inside of the letter O, we can see that our drop shadow is actually on top of the glow. And this is a control that you simply can't get by just adding a glow node after your text, right? You just don't have that same level of control. Now we can see we actually have two different types of glow. We've got the outer haze glow that we do have here, but we also have another glow that's kind of on top of our text. And we're going to create that right now by going over to our shading elements. We're going to enable shading element 4. We're going to change the appearance to be our outline. We're going to change the outline to white. Let's bring our thickness up and let's increase the softness. And actually, you know what? Let's make this right into our letters here. And here's where having that element of control comes in really, really handy. Down here in our position menu, we can change the priority from back to front. And you'll notice as soon as I slide this up, we end up with a very, very different look compared to what we had before. If I set this back to its default at the back, we end up with shading element 4 underneath everything else. But because I want the glow to be on top of our text, right, I'm just going to slide this all the way up to the front. Now we can begin to actually get somewhere. So what I'm going to do here, just to give our text a little bit more definition, is I'm going to turn off shading element 4 for now. We're going to go back into shading element 2. And what I want to do is add just a tiny bit of offset going down and to the right. And then we're going to bring in our softness just a little bit, something like this, where we've got a little bit of separation from our background glow. And then I'm also going to go to shading element 3, and I'm going to increase this glow to something like 50. Yeah, here we go, to something like this. Now, back in shading element 4, if we enable this and we pull our opacity down, maybe until it's kind of at something like this, we can play around with the softness till we've got something like this. And what the glow on top of our text body and on top of our shadow does is it helps to soften out the look so that we're getting this glow behind, but we're also seeing it kind of bleed into the front. So we still get the depth and separation between our big glow and our text, but we also get to still kind of keep some of that nice, soft, almost kind of like light wrap feel in the front. So now that I've shown you guys a little bit of the secret sauce that makes shading elements super, super powerful, it's time to jump into actually animating our text. And I want to show you guys what exactly we're going to make before we make it. So you can see right here, we actually have a simple text node that's connected to a box blur and a transform. Both of those connect it into a switch node, which then connects once again into another box blur and another transform, which then goes into another switch. Finally, that last switch connects us to a displace with a fast noise attached and one more switch. And this may seem a little bit complicated at first, but this kind of setup is exactly where the gold lies. So let me hit our box up here, and I'm going to select all three of my switches here, and I'm going to pin them in the inspector so that I can have them open all at the same time. I'm also going to click on our box blurs here because we're also going to need some controls from there. So when we take a look at our reference media here, we can see that not every single animation is exactly the same, right? There's a little bit of a difference between some of them. So maybe sometimes you don't want to have a box blur, or maybe you just want something to animate in and you don't want it to have any motion to animate out. A lot of subtitle animation will have slight variations in the start and end animations to help the words flow more easily on and off of the screen. And that is exactly what this setup gives you. So when we start our composition here, what you're going to see is a blur and grow onto the screen. You're going to see our text rippling while it's on the screen, and then it's going to blur and shrink off. So there's our blur and grow on. We've got our text rippling right now. And as we hit the end of the composition, boom, just like that. Now, maybe you're only going to want the ripple for certain words. You don't want every single line in your video to be rippling. And so that is where this switch node comes in and allows me to turn off our ripple. Maybe you don't want anything to animate out at the end. You only want things to animate on, but maybe you also want the ripple on. Or maybe instead you'd like to have no animation on at the beginning, just like this, and you only want it to animate out at the end, just like this. So as you can see, there are all kinds of different controls that we can build into these different text animations. Heck, we can even take the box blurs that we have on at the beginning and end animation, and we can hide them so that we only have our animation and maybe our ripple as well. And so knowing how to use these basic tools to create these incredibly flexible and powerful text animations plays a paramount role in saving you hours and hours of time. And I'm going to show you exactly how to make this right now. Now, when most people do animations like this, they do two things wrong right off the bat. The first is not building for flexible frame rates. And the second is not thinking of future use, meaning that when they take their animation and they try to pull it into a project that has a different frame rate than their current one, the timing doesn't work because it's on a different frame rate. For example, if I have an animation that's 24 frames long on a 24 frames per second timeline, that means the animation is 1 second long. If I take that same animation and I put it onto a 60 frames per second timeline, that animation now takes less than half a second. And that is a huge and easily avoidable mistake. So if we want to avoid all these problems when we're setting up our box blur, first we have to add it in, of course, with Shift Spacebar. We're going to do box blur, connect our text into our box blur, and just click and drag our box blur. We can see by default, our box blur strength starts at 0.25. So we're going to drag that all the way down. And we're actually going to split our horizontal and our vertical so that we can control the individual blur levels independent from each other. Now, in order to make the animation actually adapt to whatever frame rate we have, we're going to need to use a modifier called Anim Curves. And if you don't know how to apply a modifier onto one of your animation properties here, you're going to right-click on the property. In this case, it's horizontal strength. You're going to go down to Modify With, and we're going to click on Anim Curves. Now you can see we have a whole bunch of other modifiers here. And modifiers are like extra tools that you can use to help you animate different properties on nodes. In this case, when we click on Anim Curves, our modifiers tab becomes active. And when we click on it, we can see we end up with a whole bunch of extra controls here. And the most important one for our purposes is time scale. This is the property that's going to scale our animation to match the timing of our frame rate. Now we can see by default, our timescale is set to a value of 1, which means our animation is going to play at the normal speed we set it at. But if we right-click on timescale and we go down here to add expression, we can now add in some variables that will take whatever our timeline frame rate is and will tell our timescale to adapt to whatever that frame rate is. For example, right now we're on a 60 frames per second timeline. But if our new project is in 30 frames per second, then we can get our variables to take that information and decrease our timescale to half speed so that the animation will still play at the speed we want it to. So in our case, this is the expression we're going to use in our timescale. And what this does is it says, take the value of 60, which is this animation's native frame rate, and we're going to divide it by the following equation, which is saying take our composition, get one of these preferences or get one of these settings, and the setting that we want to get is the composition's frame format. Or to explain that in English, what we're doing is we're taking our original frame rate, we're saying, hey, go get one of the settings because we want to divide by it. And the setting that we're getting is the composition's frame rate. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, look at the timeline's frame rate, take that as a number value, and use it to divide 60. And the result of this equation ends up giving us exactly the value we need to match our animation speed to the speed of the frame rate. So take this equation exactly as you see it here with all of the uppercase and lowercase letters and type it into the timescale expression field. And you can see that because we're in a 60 frame per second timeline, our timescale doesn't change at all. And now that we have our timescale set up, let's actually give our box blur an animation that it can then adapt. And from now on, this is where we're going to do the majority of our animation. And keep in mind, this Anim Curves modifier has all the controls that we are using to animate our horizontal strength. So back in the modifiers tab, I can change the curve shape from transition to custom, and you actually get 3 options here. One is duration, which means that we're slowly going to go from 0 to 1 across the entire length of the fusion composition. So if I go back into our tools here and we look at horizontal strength, we'll see we go from 0 all the way up to 1 by the time we reach the end. Obviously, we don't want that. We want to have a custom animation. So we're going to take our source and we're going to set it to custom. Now, first things first, let's go all the way to frame 0. Let's add a keyframe on our input area, change our value to something like 0.4, right? Like this. So it's kind of blurry, but it's not all the way pulled out. So something like that, 0.4. And then I'm going to go, I think, 6 frames over. So now we're on frame 6. And I'm going to set this to 0. So now over the course of 6 frames, if I hit play, we get something just like this. Let's actually pull this out another 2 frames. I'm going to go up into this keyframes area here. I'm going to make sure I have box blur selected. Otherwise, I might not be able to see my keyframe controls. I'm going to hit the drop-down menu, and I can use Control on my keyboard and scroll up in order to zoom in and see exactly where my keyframes are positioned. And we can see we have a keyframe on 0 and we've got a keyframe on 6. And we can see we're going from that 0.4 all the way down to 0. And the way I can change this is very, very easy. I'm just going to click on this last keyframe here and drag it to 8. And you can see in here, if we do the exact same control and scroll in on our timeline here, now our keyframe is at 8. Right? We could even drag this out to 10, into 4, wherever you want. If I hit play again, now it's a little bit slower. So let's get rid of our keyframes menu because we don't need that out anymore. And we're going to make sure we have our box blur selected again. We're going to go back into modifiers. And now it's time for us to change our easing. And if you want to see exactly the kind of curve you're getting with your easing, then you're going to go into the spline area right here. We're going to click on that to open up our spline menu so we can see exactly the curve and change of the values of our keyframes, meaning we can see if it's smooth or if it's kind of jarring and sudden. This is the area that's going to let us know exactly what our animation will feel like. So I'm going to click on this checkbox so that box blur is visible. And we can see right now that the animation is linear. It just goes from a straight value change, no kind of ease in or ease out. We're going to make some adjustments to the curve of that animation so we can control how smooth or how jarring we want it to be. Now, because the overall change of our box blur goes from blurry to completely clear, I think what we're going to do is ease into the blur, have a really aggressive spot in the center, and then have some easing right at the end so that the whole thing comes across looking really, really smooth. And what that looks like in our spline editor here is kind of like a backwards S curve. So what I'm going to do is drag a box over my first keyframe, and I'm going to grab one of the handles here and just kind of drag it out like that. Then we're going to do the same with the other one, and we're going to drag the handle down just like this. And there you can see we now have a little bit of a backwards S curve. So now, when we play our animation forward, the first 2 frames don't have a ton of change. The center will have a whole bunch of change. And then the end will once again be very, very subtle. So when we play it back, it's going to look just like this. And the best part about setting up your animations like this is now, no matter what frame rate we use for this animation, it's always going to match up exactly how we need it to be. Now, there is one more thing we need to set up in order for this to work perfectly, and that is a key stretcher. For this part, you guys don't need to follow along. I'm just going to demonstrate the mistake most people make here. So most people will start at the beginning with their animation. They'll go into settings and they'll add some kind of animation. So I'm going to add a keyframe, add another keyframe. So I'll start off with my text at 0 at the beginning, and then we'll watch through and we see our text has moved from left to right. Now, a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll then take their text and they'll say, okay, well, I want my text to be on the screen for longer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag out the beginning here. And what they don't realize is that even though you've dragged out the beginning, your keyframes stay exactly in place, meaning your text doesn't move when you want it to move. In our case, it's not sticking to the beginning of our effect. It's staying exactly where we keyframed it. And this is a super, super common problem that a lot of Fusion users will have, with effects not matching up with frame rates and with effects not sticking to the ends and beginnings of clips. But we can fix that with a tool called the key stretcher. Now we're going to click on our box blur right here, and we're going to go up into our modifiers. And this is where we're going to put our key stretcher. Now, what our key stretcher will do is it will force our animation to always be in one particular area of our clip, meaning that we can take our animation that we have at the beginning right here, and we can force those keyframes to always be pushed to the beginning of our animation. And the way we're going to do this is by going to our input right here, because this is our animated property. This is the part we want to actually add the key stretcher to. We're going to right click and we're going to go to insert. Now you can see we have a bunch of different options here. The one we want is our keyframe stretcher. So we're going to click on that. And now you'll see we have a new tab open in our modifiers menu. And this is where we're going to set up the key stretcher properties so it knows exactly where everything is and how far to push our different animations. Now, starting from the top, we have our source start and our source end. And all this does is hold the beginning and ending value of your Fusion composition. So for us, we are actually starting at frame 0. So we're going to leave our source start at 0, but we can see that our ending frame goes all the way up to a value of 300. So we're going to go to our source end and we're going to type in 300. Here we actually have the stretch start and stretch end. And this is where the magic takes place. Now that we've told Fusion exactly how large our composition is, we're going to tell it which areas we want it to affect and which areas we want it to leave alone completely. So I'm going to take my stretch end here and I'm going to drag it all the way out to 300, meaning that everything from frame 24 to frame 300 is essentially frozen. Nothing's going to happen in there. And because our start animation goes all the way up to frame 8, I'm going to want to take our stretch start setting and we're going to set that to a value of 8. And this ensures that now whenever we drag this animation onto our timeline, we're always going to end up with this blur taking place at the beginning, no matter if we drag it out, bring it in, or even chop up our title to make several versions of it. Now, before we carry on making the rest of our animation here, let's do a quick recap. In order to make sure we could have our animation adapt to any frame rate, we right-clicked on our horizontal strength and clicked Modify with Anim Curves. Also, a tip here, it is very important that you do not have any keyframe active, otherwise you will not be able to add the Anim Curves modifier. Then, once we had Anim Curves added, we went into the Modifiers tab and changed our source to Custom. This instantly opens up the input field, which allows us to add our own custom animation. We also went down to our time scale and right-clicked on it to add an expression. We then added on our own expression that would take our native frame rate inside this effect and divide it by our timeline's frame rate. This makes sure that our timing for our animation always matches up and plays naturally, aligning up with our frame rate. Then we opened up our spline editor and making sure we had our box blur selected, we clicked on our box blur checkmark to make it visible. And you can also click on this little arrow here to kind of full size your animations. And then we dragged windows over top of both of our keyframes and we dragged our handles to set up a nice backwards S-curve, making our animation nice and smooth. Last but not least, we also went into our keyframes menu and adjusted the timing of our animation, pulling it out from 6 frames to 8, just by clicking and dragging on our keyframes like so. Last but not least, we right-clicked on our input control, went to insert and added a keyframe stretcher. Then, in our keyframe stretcher menu, we changed our source values to match the length of our composition. Then we also changed our stretch values, bringing our end all the way up to the end of our composition and bringing our start all the way down to frame 8, giving our in animation the exact amount of space it needs to work. And now that we've done all this, we're ready to move on and animate the rest of our composition here. So the next part of this we're going to break down is why we've split our animations into seemingly 3 different categories here. Now, the reason we've done this is to give you a little bit of a modular build here. What that means is you can select what parts of your animation you want to show and what parts you don't. And we can do that using a switch node. Now, what a switch node does is very, very straightforward. If we hit Shift Spacebar and we type in switch, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to plug my box blur into our first switch node, and then I'm going to drag it down and I'm going to grab a transform node, plug our box blur into our transform node, and then I'm also going to plug the transform node into our switch again. The only difference is with our transform node selected, we're going to go into the inspector and we're going to drag the size up to 2. Now let's make this just one viewer. And if I take my switch node and I click and drag it into our viewer, you see we have in our inspector here a little source menu, and this will change which input we're going to be showing in our viewer. Kind of like the switch on a train track, you get to decide where your media goes and what ends up showing here. So if we switch to input 1, we now get to see the larger change we made using our transform control. And if we switch back, then we're seeing just our text and our box blur. Now, this comes in really, really handy if, for example, we decide we want to be able to control the box blur for our in animation, along with the size animation at the beginning. And then we also want to be able to control the visibility for the animation at the end as well. We're also going to add on a little bit of a ripple here with the ability, of course, to toggle it on and off. All right, now here's where we're going to test your knowledge. We're going to speed things up just a little bit. I'm going to get a new transform node. We're going to connect our box blur onto it. And then I'm going to go up into our inspector here for our transform node, and we're going to animate our size here. Now, you'll also notice we have a box here labeled Use Size and Aspect. This allows us to manipulate just the X or just the Y size. And you can play with this a little bit more if you want to determine if you want to squish your text down or squish your text in. But for now, we're going to leave this checked off, and we're going to add our Anim Curves modifier right onto this. Now into the modifiers tab, we're going to change our source, of course, to custom because we don't want our text to increasingly grow in size over time. I'm going to set this to a default value of 1, and you'll notice that this is really, really big right now. And that is because our scaling by default on a transform node is up to 5. So I'm going to click this little dot in the center here. We're going to put this down to 1, and then I'm going to add the exact same expression on our time scale that we had in our box blur. So going back to click on our box blur, we're going to go open up our Anim Curves, triple click in our timing. We're going to copy that, go into our transform node, and paste that expression right in there. Now, because the animation on our box blur is 8 frames long, we're going to do the exact same thing with our transform node. I'm going to go to frame 0, add a keyframe, then I can double click on this field right here, hit the number 8. Now we're on frame 8. And I can add another keyframe. So right now, both of these are at 1, but I think I want our text to kind of pop in. So I'm going to double click and set this to something like 0.8, maybe 0.9. So this goes kind of like this. Then I'm going to go into my spline editor. We can resize our animations to fit using this button right here. And as you can tell, it doesn't always give you the exact framing that you want. So I'm just going to pull this out a little bit, middle mouse button to drag back and forth, hit control and scroll wheel out to zoom out a little bit. And then now I'm going to drag a window on top of my first keyframe and pull my handle down here, take this other one, pull the handle up a bit. And just like that, we are creating the same kind of smooth movement that we have on our box blur. Last but not least, we're going to go back into the modifiers tab here for our transform node. We're going to right click on the input, and remember, we're going to go to insert this time. We're going to go key stretcher, and because our overall source end is at 300, we're going to set this to 300, bring our stretch end all the way to 300 as well. Then we're going to set our stretch start to 8 frames just like that. And boom, now we have our box blur and our transform animation set up, lined up with each other. Let's close our spline editor here. And just like that, you have your very first animation set up in DaVinci Resolve that will not only adjust to the timing of your frame rate, but it's also going to adapt to whatever size you decide to make it in your timeline. Now, let's add a switch node using Shift Spacebar. We're going to plug our text into our first input here and then our transform on top of it. And then with our switch node selected, I can go back into our inspector. And we want to change this because we don't want the name of our inputs to be input 0 and input 1. We want this to be an on-off switch so we can tell exactly what is set to what. So we're going to go into the configuration settings, and I'm going to double click on input 0, set this to off. And then when I hit enter, it will automatically move on to the second one, and we're going to put this one as on. Now, if I go back into controls, you can see we now have an off-on switch. So let's take our switch, drag it into our media viewer so we can see what we're working with. And if I hit play, you'll notice nothing's happening, and that's because our switch is set to off, meaning that only our text is showing. If we now set it to on, we're going to be using this lane here, which will show our box blur and our transform animation. And boom, just like that, we now have a switch that can toggle on and off our entire beginning animation. Now, one last thing, because we're going to have an in animation switch and we're also going to have an out animation switch, we're going to want to be able to tell which one controls which on and off. So we're going to right click on source, we're going to go to edit controls, and now you get this entire big window with a whole bunch of different stuff that you've probably never seen before. The only thing we need to pay attention to right now is the name. Right now we're controlling the source, and we want to rename this as our in animation. And if we go down here to page, we can see we've got 4 different options. We have user, common, configuration, and controls. Now, 2 of those show up actually already as tabs on our switch node. And we can see the current area where our options are showing up is in the controls tab. So we're going to make sure we keep this selected. Then we're going to go down to OK. We're going to click that. And now you'll see we've changed our name from source to in animation. And just to see that it still works, looks like it still works when it's on and still works when it's off. Pretty darn cool. And just like that, we have our in animation set up with a switch to turn it on and off. Now we're going to do almost the exact same thing for our out animation, but with a few small changes. Obviously, we're going to want to add in another box blur and another transform. Then we're going to connect our switch to our box blur, and we're also going to add one more switch right here. We're going to connect our first switch, which controls our in animation, to our second switch, which will control our out animation, and then we're going to connect our transform node into our second input. Next, we're going to take our transform node and we're going to throw that up in our viewer. Now, let's select our second box blur. We're going to split our horizontal and vertical strength. Going to bring the vertical down again. And this time, because we're going to be increasing the blur, we're going to start off at 0 and then increase as we go. And I really liked the 8-frame animation we had from before, so we're going to do the exact same thing here. And we're going to go to frame 292 so that by the time we hit the end of our composition, our animation has taken place across 8 frames. Let's go to our horizontal strength, modify width, anim curves. We're going to go into modifiers, change source from transition to custom. We're going to add a keyframe on our input, and then we're going to go all the way to the end of our composition and we'll add 0.4. And now here is where one of a few changes is going to take place. This time, when we go to our timescale, when we add our expression onto our timescale, instead of using our normal timescale expression, which works with beginning and middle animations, we're going to use this one, which works with the end. And the most important part in this expression is right here, where we have X. Now, what you're going to want to do is type out this entire expression right here, but you're going to replace the letter X here with however many frames long the end animation is. So in our case, that's 8. And so now, basically what this expression is doing is it's checking to see how many frames we are from the end of the fusion composition. And then we're basically running the same expression that we use for our beginning and middle animations, but making sure that we're focused only on our end part. It's a little bit of a weird setup, just the way Fusion seems to work. So we're going to take this and we're making sure we have X changed to 8 because our end animation is 8 frames long. We're going to copy this into our timescale. And now let's smooth out our animation just like we did at the beginning. So I've opened up my spline editor. I'm going to use Control and scroll wheel to adjust my size here so I can really see what I am working with. And just like before, we're going to do an S curve, except this one is going forward. So we're going to do something like that, something like this. Boom, there we go. And then of course, last but not least, we're going to go into our input here. We're going to hit insert and we're going to our keyframe stretcher once again. And because we have more or less the same settings that we did before, we're going to remember to put our source end to 300. And the difference with our stretch start and our stretch end is that this time the animation is at the end. So we're going to type in 292 at the end instead of typing in 8 at the beginning. And boom, just like that, we have set up the box blur part of our end animation. So let's do the exact same thing with our size. We're going to modify our transform size with anim curves, go into the modifier tab, change our scale back down to 0, source to custom. We're on frame 292, and this time we want to start at 1 and then go down to 0.9. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to right click our time scale, add expression, and I'm going to go back to my box blur, open my anim curves here, triple click, and then copy the expression, go back to our transform. Boom. Now we've got the exact same expression in here, and we don't need to change what our X variable was because it's going to be the exact same animation length. Then, with our spline editor still open, let's enable our spline for our transform. We're going to zoom in here, and we're going to create our little backwards S-curve because we're decreasing in value with our transform as opposed to increasing the amount of blur with our box blur. So, boom, just like that. We now have, if we pull our switch into our viewer right here, we have our in animation at the beginning and we have our out animation at the end. And let's go into our switch here. Let's change the name of our source to be out animation by going to our edit controls. Let's change our name to out animation. Make sure we leave this on controls. We're going to go boom, just like that. And then we're going to go into our configuration. We're going to change this to off, and we're going to change our other input to on. Boom, we've got both of these turned on right now. So we should have our in animation active and our out animation active. Let's turn off our in animation and have just our out animation. Boom, just like that. Easy peasy. Let's try this opposite. Out animation off, in animation on. And yeah, we're looking good. All right, so now this is kind of the icing on the cake. We're going to add a little bit of a ripple effect to our text right here because sometimes you will see those on some of those motivational reels. And the way we're going to do that is by using a fast noise node and a displace node. Now, it's very, very important that you pay attention to how you set up your displace node. The yellow input, or background input, as it's called, will control what we see, and whatever gets plugged into the yellow input is what we're going to be displacing or warping. And so because we want our text to be the thing that we are adding our displacement effect to, we're going to plug our switch into our displace. Then we're going to take our fast noise, and we're going to plug it into the green or foreground input of our text. And this is going to tell our displace to take our background information and use our foreground information to apply different changes to it. Now let's drag our displace into our viewer, and you can see the size increased just a little bit. And that is because in our inspector, our current displace setting is set to radial, which means that it's kind of one big circle. All the changes are taking place from the center and moving outward. So if I pull this up, it's going to slowly warp from the center. And let's create another monitor here, bring our fast noise into the left one. And what we're doing is we're using the light data from our fast noise to determine what exactly is warping. So in our fast noise menu here, which you can get to by clicking on the fast noise node, we're going to bring our contrast up, and you'll see that the brighter and more defined our light information gets, the more our text warps when connected to our displace. So let's bring this back down to 0, and then let's also bring our refraction strength down so we're not warping everything a crazy amount. You can almost think of your refraction strength as your warp or displace strength. And we're going to change our displacement type to XY instead of radial. And this is going to give us a little bit more control over how we're warping our text. For example, if I bring up just our X refraction, you're going to see everything only shifting and stretching out horizontally. And if I increase just our Y refraction, you're going to see everything getting a lot more wavy because it's being stretched up and down. So back in our fast noise, let's increase our scale just a little bit so we can get much smaller warping instead of these big kind of wavy lines. And let's bring our detail up just a little bit. Here's what our detail looks like brought all the way up. And here's what our detail looks like brought all the way down. Essentially, your detail is going to control how much definition you have. So we're going to bring ours up to like 2.4. And now, if we bring our Y refraction up just a little bit and our X refraction up just a little bit, now we've got a little bit of warping in our text. But the way we're going to create some rippling is by going into our fast noise here, and we're going to go to seethe rate in the bottom, and we're going to drag this up just a little bit, maybe to like 1.3, 1.4. And there we go, just like that. Now, because our fast noise has moving light information, we're going to apply the exact same changes in our light information onto our text. And we can actually bring our detail down a little bit. And let's even bring our scale down to something like 5, maybe even 3.5. And boom, just like that, we're doing pretty good. We're also going to adjust our X offset and our Y offset. And what these two controls do is they counteract the position changes that our text is experiencing. So if I, for example, drag our X refraction up and our Y refraction up, but I have my Y offset all the way down and my X offset all the way down, you can see our text is being pulled from the center position to being down and to the left. Whereas with both my X offset and my Y offset brought all the way down, it's counteracting our X and Y refractions, keeping our text right in the middle. So let's put these back to normal, and boom, just like that, we've got our wavy text. Once more, what we're going to do is we're going to add a switch so we can toggle on and off our ripple effect. The way I'm going to do that is, once again, by adding on a switch, we're going to connect our second switch into our third, and then we're also going to connect the displace just like that. We're going to put our off and on switch as we normally do. We're going to go edit control as well, and we're going to name this to ripple. You can name it to wave or whatever else you'd like. And so now, if I hit this little pin icon here in the inspector and I add on all of our switches, we can see that we have our in animation, our out animation, and our ripple settings all available to us. So if we create just one viewer here and we play this through, we can see we've got our in animation on. We can see we have our out animation off along with our ripple. Maybe we want to put our ripple on, or maybe we want all three effects on. So we're going to have it animate in, we're going to have it ripple as it plays throughout, and then our text is going to blur off of the screen. And so when you finally export something like this as a text preset, you'll find that you can basically mimic the exact same styles that you're seeing, and you might find that you now have the ability to master the motivation method. Now, if you think effects like this are cool, this is only scratching the surface. I actually created a modular text preset using these exact same tools to create over 225 different animation combinations. I'll leave the link to it in the description down below. The next method of subtitle animation we're going to be mastering is the Vox style subtitle. One of the signature subtitle animations of Vox is animated highlighted text. And so that is exactly what you're going to learn to make right here. But there's more to it than just that, because not only do we have a highlighter effect, we can also control what side we animate from, along with how much of a pad we decide to give ourselves. So without further ado, the first thing we're going to need is a rectangle mask. And the rectangle mask is going to act as our box for our highlighter effect. Now we're going to take our rectangle mask and just drag it into our viewer like this. The white area is what's going to be visible. The black area is what is not going to be visible. So we can drag it down to something like this. We'll make it match the size of our reference footage roughly. So it's something like that. Next, we're going to need a background so that we have a color for our highlighter. So I'm going to hit Shift Spacebar and just hit BG in the search bar. And just like that, we can connect our rectangle mask to our background, throw that right in there. Just like that, we have our highlighter color. Obviously, we don't want it to be black though. So let's change it to something more like this. Next, because we're going to need to animate our highlighter, we're going to need another transform node. We're going to bring our transform node down and connect our background to it. So now we've got a mask controlling the area of our highlighted effect, and we've plugged in the highlighted area into a transform node, which will allow us to move it and adjust the size of it. Now, you remember the checkbox I told you about earlier, the use size and aspect checkbox? We're going to want to uncheck that because we're going to be animating the X size to create our highlighter animation. Next, we're going to bring in a text plus node, and we're going to merge it over top of our transform node by simply grabbing the text output and dragging it on top of our transform output. And you'll see it'll automatically create a merge node for us. Now, it's very, very important that you drag the text output over top of the transform and not the other way around. Otherwise, you're going to end up with your highlighter on top of your text instead of the other way around. So the font we'll be using for this effect is Open Sans Extra Bold. And before we even type anything in, I'm going to go to my color. We're going to hit Pick Screen Color, and I'm going to go onto our reference and just grab the exact same color or the exact same shade of gray that they're using. Then we're going to add in a random date. Let's do 2000 to 2026. Next, let's bring our size up just a tad, and we can use these red arrows here on top of our text to adjust its X and Y position. And now that we have the highlighter that goes underneath of our text, and we have the text itself, it's time for us to create our two animations. Now, the first thing we're going to do is animate our text. And you can see from our reference, our text animates on letter by letter. Now, normally this would be either really difficult or impossible to do. We'd have to get several text nodes, type in one letter for each of them, and then we'd have to animate them all separately with the same timing. Another method would be using character level styling, which we learned about earlier, and animating every single letter individually. We're not going to do either of those. Instead, we're going to use the follower modifier. Now, if we right-click anywhere inside of our text box, we're going to get this big menu. You might recognize a few things like the switch, the edit controls, and the expression, but we're focused on this right here. As soon as we click follower, we're going to see our modifiers tab light up here. This means we've applied the follower modifier to our text. And what the follower modifier actually does is it will allow you to animate your words and letters with a little bit of a delay between each one. And so you can see we have a whole bunch of different tabs right here. The only two tabs we're going to need today are the timing tab, which will control the amount of delay between each character, and the transform tab, which is how we'll actually be animating our letters. So the first thing we're going to do is go all the way to frame 0, and we're going to click on the keyframe of our transform offset. Now you'll notice this instantly closes out the follower and gives us an active animation path. This is by design. You haven't done anything wrong. All you need to do is open up the follower tab once again by double clicking on it. And now you can see we have an active offset keyframe. Then we're going to go about 17 frames forward, and we're going to add in another keyframe. So now we have the timing of our animation set up. Let's go back to frame 0, and then in the Y offset of our transform in the follower, which remember is in the modifiers tab, not the tools tab, we're just going to take our Y coordinate and we're going to drag it down like this until it is just below our highlighter bar. Now, if we play our animation, we can see that our text slowly moves up. So we're doing everything right so far. Now, in the timing tab, we're going to add a little bit of a delay and take a look to see exactly what that looks like. And let me actually make the color something a little bit brighter and easier to see. If we play our animation back, we can see now all of our letters will animate on one by one, which is good, but it's a little slow. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go back into our modifiers tab, and let's bring our delay down to something like 1. Let's also take our delay type and change it from between each character to between first and last character. Now we're going to end up with a delay of 1 between our 2 and our 6 instead of a delay between the 2, the 0, the other 0, and so on. So now we can actually bring this up a little bit. Let's go about halfway in our animation, slowly bring our delay up. And just like that, we've got something that begins to resemble our reference. Now in our reference, our text also slowly fades in as well as animating on. So we actually are going to go into the shading tab today over here, and we're going to add a keyframe on frame 0 for our opacity, bring it all the way down, Then let's go to where our first letter is visible, which seems to be on frame 9. And we're going to bring our opacity all the way back up to 1. And now, if we watch this back, we end up with something that looks like this, which isn't bad, but I think we can do a little bit better. Let's change our delay type again from between first and last character to between each character. And then let's add a delay of 1. And now that we have everything animated, let's smooth out these animations just a little bit. So up in our spline editor, we're going to zoom everything to fit. And now let's drag a box over our first keyframe and give these two handles a little bit of an adjustment. Now I'm going to want to start this animation off fast and then have it slow down at the end. So we're dragging our handles both to be straight up, and then I'm going to drag a box over these other two keyframes, and I'm going to hit the F key on my keyboard, which stands for flatten. And you can see it has adjusted our animations to be a little bit smoother. So now when we watch our animation back, we're already looking a lot better. Now that that's done, we can close our spline editor. So now that we have our text animated, there's one last thing we need to do with it before we move on to creating our highlighter box. And that is select it and create a copy of it. And then we're going to hit Control-Shift-V. If you're on Windows, if you're on Mac, it's probably Command-Shift-V. If you're on Linux, I can't help you. And what this is going to do is create an instance of our text. Now, our instance is like a copy, except it's going to mimic every single change we make to the original. And this can be really, really good if you need multiple copies of something, but you need all of them to do the same thing. And instances have a ton of really good use cases. We're not going to dive deep into them today, but I am going to show you one really cool one. So now that we have our instance text, we're going to select it. We're going to go up to our text box. We're going to right click, and we're going to click de-instance. Last but not least, we're going to right click in our text box, and we're going to remove follower. Now what we should see if we play back our animation is that our instance text should not be animated at all, while our original text should be animating. And that is exactly what we end up with. Now this is going to be very, very important for later. For now, it's time to animate our highlighter effect. So if we take our merge here and we pull it into our viewer, we're going to have our highlighter underneath our text. And what we're going to want to do is have our highlighter animate on from left to right. Now, typically, the way you would do this is you'd go up into your pivot and you would pull the X pivot over. Then you would take your X size and you would just animate it down from 0, right? Just like that. But because we don't always know where our text is going to start, especially if our text is much longer like this, there's no way for us to know exactly where we're going to need our pivot at any given time. This is where data windows are going to be incredibly useful once again. Now what we're going to do is create an expression on our pivot that will automatically adapt to the leftmost or rightmost side of our text, so that no matter what we type, we're always going to have our highlighter start exactly where we need it. So with our transform node selected, we're going to go into our inspector. We're going to right click on the pivot and click add expression. So in order to control what side our anchor is on, we're not just going to need our data output windows, we're also going to need to use a custom tool node. And we can get a custom tool node by simply typing in custom tool and selecting this one right here. Now, a custom tool node is basically just a blank node with a whole bunch of buttons and dials. And what you can do with a custom tool node is decide what kind of values you want to link to all these controls. And because we're not going to need all of these, we're going to go into the configuration settings and we're going to open up all 3 of these menus and we're going to start unchecking different boxes. We're going to get rid of all of our LUT controls, all of our point controls, and we're going to get rid of all but 3 of our number controls. Then we're going to go back into our controls and you can see we've got number input 1, number input 2, and number input 3. So what we're going to do with this custom tool is we're going to set this up so that depending if our number input 1 is either positive or negative, that is going to determine which side of our data window our pivot point is on. So in our transform node, we have our expression field already active, and the expression we're going to use is this one. So you can see we have the same start. We're going to start off with point. We're going to open a bracket, and we're going to have the same default value of 0.5 to start off with our X. And then we're going to add on this equation. So basically what this expression is doing is it's saying, here is your point coordinate. Your X coordinate is going to be 0.5 plus this equation right here. If the value of our number in one input is greater to or equal to 0, then we're going to use our rectangle 2.width value and divide it by 2, which is this node right here. If it's not greater than or equal to 0, we're going to use whatever the negative value of that is. To put this into English, if the custom tool's number input is 0 or above, then our pivot point is going to be on the left side. If it's not, it's going to be on the right side. Simple enough. Let's copy this expression and add it into our pivot points expression field. Oh, and it looks like I actually did that backwards. So if we're positive, we're going to be on the right side. And if we're negative, then we're going to be on the left side. And we're actually using the rectangle mask. I forgot we're not using the text because we do want to make sure that the pivot point is actually wherever the highlighter starts, because we are going to have a little bit of padding on both the top and the bottom of our highlighter. Now, if I take the rectangle width and I drag that out, then I go to my transform again, you can see we still have our pivot point matching exactly where the rectangle begins. So now that we have our transform's pivot point set up, we're going to delink our size and aspect. So we're just animating our X size, and we're going to add a keyframe on our transform node's X size. We're going to bring it all the way down to 0. Then we're going to quickly type in here frame 17, and we're going to bring this back up to 1. So now, over time, we can see our transform animates our highlighter effect in from left to right. And then, of course, you know we're going to go into our spline editor. We're going to make our transform X spline very visible. And what I can do here is I can actually drag a box over both of these. And if I hit F, it's automatically going to flatten them and give us that nice S-curve. Now, I'm actually going to drag these out just a little bit more to make our S-curve a little bit more accentuated and give our ease in and our ease out a little bit more time to move into and out of the animation, making things a little bit more smooth. Just like that. So now that that's taken care of, there is still one more thing to do, and that is to make sure that our highlighter size is always going to adapt to our text size, because currently, if we do something like this, we still have our highlighter animating from the pivot point of the rectangle mask, but the rectangle mask isn't adapting to our text size. So in order to change this, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our rectangle mask, and we're going to add expressions to both the width and the height to link them to the data output windows of our text, making sure that no matter what font we use or what size our text is, or even how much text we put in, we will always have a highlighter size that matches our text size. So in order to make this work, these are the expressions we're going to use. And if you remember how output data windows work from earlier, what we're doing here is we're going to take both the top and bottom of our height, and we're going to take the left and right side of our width as values, and we're going to subtract the smaller one from the larger one, and then turn it from a pixel value into an actual value we can put into our width. And that value is going to give us proper sizing for our highlighter mask. So we're going to subtract this side from this side, and then change the format of that information so our nodes can understand what kind of value they need to actually output in order to give us a mask that fits with our text. So you can see we're doing 3 minus 1, and then we are dividing it by our output width to give us an actual value we can use. And then here's where the cool part comes in. We're going to multiply it by our number input 2 on our custom tool. And what that's going to do is allow us to create a little bit of a padding effect so that our highlighter isn't always exactly the same size as our data window. Now, to show you exactly what this looks like, I'm going to copy this expression. I'm going to go to our rectangle 2, and I'm going to go to width, paste that expression in, and you can see this instantly will drop to 0. Now, that is because in our custom tool, we have number in 2 set to 0. If I type in 1, you see we end up with the exact size we need to make our rectangle or highlighter mask fit our text. And if I increase this a little bit more, we end up with some padding. Now, even cooler is if we go to our transform node, you can see the pivot is still matching, even after changing so much information with the width. So basically what's taking place here is we're making the width copy the text's width, and then we're making the transform pivot always follow whatever one or the other side of the rectangle is. So the transform follows the rectangle follows the text. A little bit confusing, but you guys should be just fine. So now that we have the width of our rectangle or highlighter mask linked to our text, we need to do the same thing with our height. And again, what we're doing is we're subtracting 2 from 4, and then we're going to divide it by the total output height to get a value that Resolve can actually use. Then we're going to multiply it overall by our custom tools number input 3. So we're going to take this expression right here, and we're going to go into our height, paste it in, and boom, it is now adapting to the value of our number in 3. So if I type in 1, we're going to match the exact height of our text, and I say we give that a little bit more padding, something like this. And now we have a highlighter effect that will adapt in size no matter what kind of text we put in. And if you remember this instance node right here, this is its important use case. We're going to be using the data window values of our instance text because it is not being animated. And this is a very, very important distinction to make. So here's what ends up happening if we try to link our rectangle mask to our main text node. What happens is we end up with a highlighter effect, which is trying to adapt to a text node that has a changing window size. Because our follower node is actually animating our text and causing it to change in its window size, what's happening is that as it animates on screen, our highlighter window is changing in size as well, which in most cases you're not going to want. So now that we've got that taken care of, let's say, for example, we want to change our text to something like the channel name. What we're going to do is we're going to type whatever we want into here, and then we're going to go to our instance text and we're going to input the same thing. And you can see just like that, our highlighter effect instantly adapts. Then we can go to our custom tool, and maybe I want this to come in from the right side. And I also want a little bit less width, but I want more height, something like that. And just like that, we're done. We've successfully mastered the Vox method. The fifth method of subtitle animation we are looking at today is the AMV method. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what an AMV is, it's usually going to be an edit of an anime show or some other form of media with a lot of flashy text, camera shakes, and transitions, kind of like this. And to keep in line with the style, usually any kind of animated subtitle in an AMV will follow that same suit. And you can see that is exactly what we're going to be making today. First things first, obviously we're going to add a text plus node. And the font we're going to be using, you should have on your computer. We're just using Open Sans Bold. So let's throw our text up into our viewer. And now we need to create the same style of text we have right here, where we've got our text body. We've got a little bit of a drop shadow underneath, you can see in certain areas. And then we kind of have a little bit of an outlined frame around our text. And we can see that it is a little bit disconnected from our text and it's not actually bound as a fixed outline. So we're going to need 3 different elements in order to make this possible. Let's go into the shading tab. And first things first, we're going to pick a color that is kind of similar to what we have here. It looks like we're working with a little bit of a yellowish gold. So let's do something kind of like that. Next, because we have 2 more parts to just the text itself, we're going to need to use our shading elements. Now, by default, our 3rd shading element is going to be our drop shadow. So let's enable that and let's add a little bit of softness to it. And because it really isn't all that visible, it just kind of adds a tiny bit of separation from the background. We're going to turn the opacity down to 0.5. Then we're going to go to our 2nd shading element. We're going to click enable, and you can see right away we've got our default setting, which is a very basic red outline. I'm going to pull up my green and my blue so we can get a white color instead, because that is what we're after. We're not looking for a red frame. Then I'm going to pull my thickness up until it kind of matches the same thickness that we have in our reference. And here's where the interesting part comes in. Just to make things a little bit easier to view, I'm going to pull the size up on our text. Then we're going to go back into our shading tab. And now we can start messing with our size. Well, the other size controls. If we scroll down in our shading tab, right now I'm on shading element 2, which is our white outline. We have a menu at the bottom here called size. And this is similar to the size on one of our transform nodes, except by default, the X and Y size are separated, meaning if I pull the Y size up a whole bunch, I'm going to get some very stretchy text. And if I pull the X size up a whole bunch, exact same thing. So what we want to do here is pull our X and our Y size up just a little bit until we end up with a little bit of separation in between our outline and our text body. And we can even pull the thickness of our outline down, because as we pull the size up, the thickness is naturally going to increase. Something else we can do is make adjustments in the offset tab, because the Y size will increase from the bottom, meaning that if we pull it all the way up, it's not going to even out in the middle. It's going to size up again from the bottom. So we're going to take our Y offset in our position, just drag that down a little bit, then pull our X size up a tiny bit as well. And then I'm going to go into shading element 1, go down into the size, and I'm actually going to start pulling the X and Y size down just a little bit. And because our Y size is still growing and shrinking from the bottom, I am actually going to need to go into shading element 2 again, go down to our offset, pull this down a tiny bit until we're working with something kind of like this. Now that it's looking a little bit closer to how I want, I think I'm going to increase the thickness a bit, just because I don't have to worry about everything stretching out of place. And then I'm actually going to go to the position here, and we're going to change priority from back to front so that we have our outline on top of our text. And there we go. Now we have our text outline, we've got our text body, and we even have our drop shadow here. And I think I'm going to actually pull the softness down just a bit for the drop shadow. Now let's go back into our text tab and pull our size down again. So we've got something that's more similar in size to our reference. And now it's time to add on all the really cool, fun, flashy stuff. So looking at a reference, we have this really cool kind of ripply warp effect, along with a really cool light rays effect, where we seem to have a focused shine that moves from left to right across our text. And the first 3 steps of this is going to be pretty straightforward. The last one, we're going to have to use some more advanced stuff to make it work. So let's add in a displace and a fast noise node. And if you have a node selected, when you add in another one, Resolve automatically adds a merge, but because we don't need this, we're going to delete it. Then I'm going to plug my text output into the background or yellow input of our displace. We're going to take the fast noise and we're going to plug it into the foreground or green input of our displace. And if you remember from before, when we have our displace selected, we can go into our inspector here and we can get more control over how everything is warping if we switch from type radial to type XY. Now, in order to get a look that is very, very similar to what we have right here, we're not only going to need to change the way that we're warping our text, we're also going to need to change the information we're using to warp it. And the way we're going to do that is by taking our fast noise, we're going to drag it up into our viewer, and now in the inspector tab for our fast noise, we're going to need to make some changes to this warp information. Because if I put our displace into the viewer right now, and then I pull up our X and Y refraction, you can see we're not getting anything even remotely close to our reference. And that's because the data from the fast noise hasn't changed at all. So what I'm going to do is keep my displace in our right viewer. I'm going to put our fast noise in the left viewer. And now we're going to start to make some changes. The first thing we're going to do is pull up our detail slider all the way. The reason we're going to do this is because the changes to the text in our reference are being made on such a small scale that we're going to need a lot of this very specific information in order to match it. And you can see in our text already we're noticing a change. If I pull the detail down, we get something a lot smoother. As soon as I pull that detail up, we start to see all the little bends in our text that we otherwise wouldn't have. We're also going to pull the contrast of our fast noise up to give us some more difference in between the heavily warped areas and the less heavily warped areas. We're also going to go back into our displace and we're going to change our settings so that we are only doing an X refraction. If we put our reference into the left viewer here, you can see we're not really having any kind of up and down warping. The text isn't being pulled up or down. We're only getting this ripple effect going from left to right. And because I don't want any up and down changes, we're leaving our Y coordinate set to 0. Now back in our fast noise, finally, we're going to go to our scale. And when you see scale on fast noise, I want you to think more size. And the higher the scale goes, the more you can see. And you'll notice as well that the higher we've brought the scale, the more ripples we're getting in our text. The lower we bring the scale, the less ripples we get. But of course, we want the majority of this change to be on our X-axis and not on our Y-axis. So what we're going to do is uncheck the lock X and Y, Then I'm going to go to X scale, and we're going to bring this up all the way, and we're actually going to push this past the normal limit. Let's set it to something like 60, because that is when we really start to see some kind of warping in our text. And then let's go to our Y scale, and let's bring this up just a bit so we don't have a completely straight up and down warping. We'll have a little bit of these changes in between as well. And so you can see we've taken our fast noise from this to this. And this is the difference in our warp information that has taken our text from looking like this to this. Now, the final step to actually give our text that active ripple is to bring our seethe rate all the way up from 0 to 1. And if we throw our reference up in our left viewer, you can see we get something very, very similar. One other detail we want to recreate is a very slight kind of wavy ripple that we can see taking place right here. We've got the D going lower, and then it curves up and then comes back down. Very, very subtle. But if we weren't paying attention to detail, we wouldn't be able to master this now, would we? And in order to create the ripple effect, we're going to be reusing these exact same tools. So we're going to get another displace node and another fast noise. But because the ripple is more like a lazy wave as opposed to being an extremely detailed kind of shimmer, when we connect our first displace to our second, and we connect our second fast noise in as well, we're going to go for a look that's a lot closer to the default settings we get with the fast noise. Now, we are still going to change from radial type to XY because, again, we get a little bit more control. And we're going to bring our X offset down maybe to something like this. Let's throw our displace into our viewer so we can actually see what we're doing. And then let's bring our X refraction up, something like that. And then we're going to bring our Y refraction up just a little bit as well. So you can see we start to get a little bit of a rise right here before falling back down. Next, let's go into our fast noise. And all I'm going to do is pull our scale in just a little bit, maybe to something like this, so we can have that wave be a little bit more pronounced. And just to show you exactly what the scale is doing, here's what happens if I pull it all the way up. And here's what happens if we slowly bring it back down. We're going to do something, we'll just do 3. I think 3 should be good for this. And now for the motion, we could do the exact same trick that we did with our first fast noise, where we bring the seethe rate up just a little bit. But because the first one was doing a little bit more of a shimmer, and we want something closer to an actual wave, we're actually going to animate some movement in our fast noise so it has some real motion and can create this wave effect, as opposed to just kind of shifting and moving in and out of visibility like you see here. And to give you guys a better visual, I'm going to disconnect our fast noise and our displace. And then with our second fast noise selected, we're going to right click, go to expression. And just like with the pivot, we have 2 values we need to change. The first one is our X, which is 0.5. And the second one is our Y, which is also 0.5. And the expression we're going to use in order to make our movement possible is, of course, our point. And we're going to do time multiplied by 0.04. And we're going to leave our Y coordinate alone. Now, what this is doing is it's saying, take the frame value, and whatever the frame value is, if it's 10, multiply that by 0.04. And whatever the output value is, that is what our X coordinate is going to be. So let's hit copy, paste that in. And because we're on frame 248, time multiplied by 0.04 gives us a value of 9.92. Now, if we go all the way back to frame 0 and we play this through, you can see because time is 0, our X coordinate also starts at 0. But as soon as we hit play, it begins increasing. Now, I think for our purposes, I'm actually going to set it to 0.01 to give us a little bit of a slower wave here, something just like that. And let's take a look at our reference footage as well, just so we can see we're getting the same speed of motion. And I think we can actually bring this up to 0.015. So we'll end up with something like this. Now, let's reconnect our text to our first displace and reconnect our first displace to our second. And now we end up with something like this, which looking pretty good. And now with our 2 ripple effects compounded, we've got the motion down for our AMV subtitles. Next, of course, you know we need to have a simple glow right here, and so that is exactly what we're going to add. This is probably the easiest step in the whole tutorial, which is to hit Shift Spacebar and type in glow. Then let's connect our displace to our glow. Let's go into our inspector, and we're going to bring this down probably to something like this. And the reason we're bringing this first glow down is because we still need to add in this light rays effect right here. And I don't want to completely blow out the color information we have on our light rays, so we're bringing our glow up so that it's visible, but not so that it's overpowering. And normally when you create your light rays, it is as simple as hitting Shift Spacebar, going down to light rays, plugging our glow right in, and then just changing the location of where the rays are coming from. But as you can see, something is not quite right. As soon as we plug our glow into our light rays, first of all, we end up with a completely black background, which we don't want. And second, we have no way of making sure that our light rays will animate across properly every single time. That is, unless we know how to use our data output windows. Now, we need to make a few changes to our light rays before we even think about animating them. We're going to get the look down first, and we'll animate after. So right off the bat, we want to get rid of this black background. So in our input alpha, we're going to change our setting from masks the source regions to is used for compositing. And now we get our transparent background back. You can always change this back to masks the source regions so that you can see exactly how your light rays look. It's a little bit easier to work with, but for us, we're going to change this to used for compositing. Then we're going to bring our source threshold all the way down, and you'll notice this makes our light rays a lot brighter. That's what's going to give us this kind of almost blown out look on our reference footage. Then because our reference has a lot more defined light rays, we're going to go into our inspector here and we're going to pull our softness all the way down. And you'll notice kind of on the edges here, we start to get a little bit more defined lines. And I'll switch this back just so you guys can see exactly what it is I'm talking about. Next, because we do want to have our light rays shining very close to the origin point, we are going to bring our length down, maybe to something like this. And then we're also going to change the color of our light rays just so we can kind of keep that yellow gold shimmer color in there. We'll do it to something maybe like this. And you can see there's the comparison, white to yellow, boom, just like that. And then let's go to our gamma here and let's bring that up just a little bit so we get some more substance to our light rays, and we can see that increases the color. So let's go for something a little bit more white, kind of like that. Then let's go into our advanced controls and increase our source recovery just a little bit. And what source recovery is going to do is it's going to force whatever is underneath the glow to show up so you're not completely losing that information. So if I pull source recovery up all the way, we can now very easily see what's underneath. As soon as I pull it down, we start to lose some of that color information. So we're going to pull this up just a little bit so that no matter what's happening, we can always kind of see a little bit of what's underneath. Then because we don't want these light rays stretching out past everything and turning our entire screen into a light show, we're going to add a very basic feathered mask. So we can hit Shift Spacebar and type in ellipse right here. We're going to add that in, and then we're going to connect the ellipse output to the light rays mask input. And just like that, you can see we're now restricting the area where our light rays can show up. And on our light ray node, I'm going to go into the inspector and we're going to change the masks the source regions to is used for compositing. Then we're going to bring our size down just a little bit, make it maybe a little bit of an oval shape, something like that. And we're going to soften the edges out. And if you ever want to see just how soft your mask is, you can always take the mask itself and pull it into your viewer so that when you adjust your soft edge, you can see exactly what it is you're working with. I think we're going to shrink this down just a little bit more, pull our soft edge out, something like that. And now we've got a pretty good thing going here, but there's still, as we can see, a few more details to work out. So we're going to go to our ray drop off and we're going to change from the default soft to CCD bloom soft. And now you can see there's a very clear difference in what we had before. So let's bring the length of our light rays back up. Let's bring both our gamma and our saturation up just a little bit, maybe to something like that. And let's also add on a shimmer effect. So in our shimmer, I think what we're going to do is pull our strength and detail all the way up so we can have the definition in our light rays being super, super visible. We can switch back to our mask to see what this looks like a little bit better. And then let's also bring our scale all the way down just to make everything a little bit more defined. And you can play around with these settings all you want in order to get all kinds of different combinations. All right, let's switch this back to is used for compositing. And now I think one more thing we're going to do is increase our soft edge up again to a 0.3 so that we still have that nice glow effect, but obviously you can see now it's not completely overpowering everything. And now that we have the aesthetic that we want for our light rays, we can now begin to animate them. Also, I am going to pull the color of our text to something a little bit more desaturated so it can match our reference a tiny bit better, just in our text node here. All right, so now what we're going to do here is we're going to set up something called expression-driven animation, which means that we won't be using keyframes for this animation at all. So the plan for our light rays is to have it animate from left to right, but also be able to control how fast that animation takes place. That's where our expression-driven animation comes in. And we also need to use our data output windows to make sure that our light rays and our ellipse will always be in the same spot. So a lot of ground to cover. Let's take it step by step. The first thing we're going to do is add a custom tool, which you can get by typing in Shift Spacebar and going to Custom Tool. You'll remember from an earlier part in the tutorial, usually we start off with a whole bunch of different properties. I've gotten rid of all except for number input 1, 2, and 3. We're going to use number input 1 as our animation length slider so we can control how long the animation is. And then we're going to use number input 2 and number input 3 to add padding onto the left and right side of our animation, just like we did with our Vox highlighter. Now in our light rays node, we're going to go to position in the inspector. We're going to right click and we're going to go to modify with XYPath. Now when we go to the modifiers tab, what we're going to see is this set of controls right here. And what we've done is we've given ourselves the ability to animate our X and our Y coordinate separately. Because, for example, with our Y coordinate, we only ever need the Y to be on the exact same level as our text. So even though it's not going to be animated, it will still need to update its position in case we ever move the text. Our X, on the other hand, is going to be moving from left to right. So first things first, we're going to add an expression onto our Y value to make sure it will always match up with our text. The way we're going to do that is by right-clicking, we're going to go to Modify With, and we're going to add on an Anim Curves modifier. And the reason we're usually using Anim Curves modifiers in order to set up these animations is really just good practice. For if you ever want to add in features for presets, like being able to animate things with custom curves or have something flexible that can adapt to any FPS using the timescale. Now in the Anim Curves for our Y path on our XY path for the light rays, we're going to right-click our input, add expression, and what you're going to end up typing in is XY path, and then whichever path you're using, dot Y, because you want the Y coordinate. In our case, what we've done is we've gone to our text node over here, then in Tools, we went to the Layout tab, we right-clicked our center control, went to Modify With, and modified it with an XY path. And the reason we're splitting our center control is the exact same reason we split our center control in our light rays. And that's because we need to use our X information differently than our Y information. So they both need to be separate. So once we have the XY path on our text, we're right here in the modifiers tab, and we're not going to animate a single thing in here. All we needed to do was split the X and Y values. And if I hover over the Y control here, we look at the bottom left of our screen so we can see the exact property name, and we see it is XYPath3.Y. So back in our light rays, that is the exact thing we've typed in. And what this is doing is it's telling our Y coordinate on our light rays that we're going to use the exact same value that the Y coordinate on the text is. So when we make changes to our Y coordinate on our text, the Y coordinate on our light ray is going to follow it. So now that we have our Y coordinate set up, it's time to set up our X coordinate. And what we're going to do is with our light ray selected, we're going to go back into our modifiers tab. We're going to go to our Anim Curves on light rays position X, which you can add by right-clicking on your X coordinate and going to Modify with Anim Curves. So once we have that opened up, we're changing the source to custom. Remember, custom allows you to actually set the animation that you want. And then once you have the expression field open in your input by right-clicking on input and hitting expression, this is the expression we're going to use. And so what this entire expression is doing is it's looking at one side of our data window, looking at the other side of our data window, using our two different custom tool number inputs as the padding, just like with our Vox highlight. And what it's doing is it's saying, okay, we're going to use this result as our minimum value, and we're going to use this result as our maximum value. And then what we're going to do is we're going to travel from the minimum value to the maximum value, which is set by our data windows and the extra padding that we add on. And all of this math put together with the appropriate variables is what's going to allow us to not just have our animation always align with our text size and always travel the distance we want it to. It also allows us, using the local duration that we're going to set using our custom tool, to control how long that animation takes. This is the most complicated expression we have used in the video. Obviously, this is not a video that is solely focused on expressions, so don't feel overwhelmed if you don't understand this at first. There is a bit of a steep learning curve. Now, an important note with this is that when you are inputting your custom tool and your text, you're going to want to change the number to whatever number you have on your text node. So for example, our text is labeled text 5, so all of the text nodes in our expression have text 5. The same with our custom tool 4, we've got number in 1, number in 2, and number in 3. So naturally, for our local duration, we're using custom tool 4, number in 1, and then for the extra padding, we have our number in 2 and our number in 3. So we're going to take this entire expression, copy it, and then in the modifiers tab of our light rays, on the anim curves X for our XYPath, we're going to open up our expression field and we're going to paste this expression inside that field. And so now with my custom tool 4 set to a value of 20, in this case 20 frames for our number in 1, we can look at the X location of our light rays. And as we play it through all the way to frame 20, we've reached the very end of the path set for us by our text. So now, let's say, for example, I want to add a little bit more of padding on either end so that the light rays don't start glowing on the I and don't end glowing on the T. They actually have to move in and move off. Maybe I'll put this up to something like 0.02, and we'll do the same thing for this one. Actually, let's pull this up to maybe 0.1. and 0.1. And now you can see we actually have a lot further distance that we're traveling. So I can drag this up even more, maybe to 0.2 and 0.2. And what will happen now is we're traveling basically from one end of the screen to the other end. And the entire animation will still take place across 20 frames. So let's take a look at our reference here and see how long it takes for the light rays to move across the screen here. Actually, what we'll do is we'll just start from 0 because we have a transition here. And it looks like it takes about 50 frames. So we'll go to our custom tool 4. We're going to type in a value of 50. And now when we watch this back, we get a really similar animation. Pretty cool considering you can always get this to animate exactly how you want it to, no matter what you type in. And you can also control the animation length. So we could set this to 150, for example, and we would get something like this, which is pretty darn cool. Now, the very last thing we need to do before we can consider this animation finished is set up our ellipse control. Now, our ellipse, you'll notice, actually follows the exact same path that our light rays does, and that is because we linked our ellipse to the XY path of our light rays. And this is really, really easy to do. What we did is with our ellipse selected in the inspector menu, we right-clicked on our center, and you guessed it, we're going to modify with an XY path. Then in the modifiers tab, what we did is we clicked this little pin icon to keep our ellipse up here. Then we clicked on our light rays. We're going to close our anim curves here. And then what we did is we opened up our light rays XY path. We right-clicked here on both our X and Y properties, added an expression. And then we took this little plus button here and just dragged it on top of the X for our X path. And then for the Y, we're going to drag the Y onto our Y path. And now what you'll notice is that as the X value changes for our light rays, we're getting the exact same X value on our ellipse. And that is because the ellipse is taking whatever the value of the light rays are, and it's saying, hey, I'm going to follow that exact same position. And boom, just like that, we have successfully mastered the AMV subtitle method. All right, thank you everyone so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a ton. This was an absolute blast to make, and I actually learned a lot about the different ways we can animate subtitles myself. So if you want to see more videos like this, or you want to see some different styles made, leave a comment below. I am going to be selling every single one of the project files that we worked on here for anyone who's interested. You want to play around with them yourself. So the project files for all 5 methods are going to be available for purchase. Link in the description. Check out the fourth wall page. We've got the all-in-one animated text preset with over 200 possible animation combinations built right into a singular preset, saving you hours of time. We've also got some free stuff up there too. If you liked the video, hit like, share it with someone who you think can use this, because there's a lot of people really struggling with text animation these days. But yeah, that's all for me. This is probably my longest video ever. Thank you everyone once again so much for watching. My name's Isaiah Grade, and I'll see you in the next video.